First, we need a motion meeting by electronic virtual bid. Can we get such a motion?
I'll make the motion. Critique dash for the note.
Seconded by Tucker.
Is that seconding?
Tucker.
I second.
Okay.
Linda Robinson.
You're not
Marissa,
muting.
are you having? Yeah, I was gonna say, are you having a technical difficulty? Yes, we can.
Favor, say aye.
If you recall, we have to do a roll call vote.
That's right.
Chair Richmond, I'm happy to assist with that.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, and just for clarification, the motion is to move that the items on the agenda constitute essential business of the board, and that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans considering COVID-19. And any rule that conflicts with the governor's executive order permitting said electronic meeting to be suspended. And just for confirmation, Commissioner Dash, is that your full motion?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Tran?
Yes.
Commissioner Yazbek?
Yes.
Commissioner Tucker?
Yes.
Commissioner Venick? You with us, Commissioner Venick? Okay, Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Day? Commissioner Robinson?
Yes.
Commissioner Richmond?
Yes.
And have I missed anybody, any commissioners who are with us? Chair Richmond, it appears the motion is passed unanimously.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Next, review and approval of the minutes. I hope everybody's taken a look at the minutes. If you have, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make the motion, Commissioner Dash.
Seconded by Tucker.
Okay. We have a motion and a couple of seconds. Is there any discussion? Did anybody find any changes, any amendments they need to make?
I offered some changes. I don't know if those were incorporated or not.
They incorporated, but let me let the other commissioners know. If you just give me 1 second here. It was a change to paragraph. At the end, Commissioner Venick announced that on Tuesday, February 21st, the Community Relations Committee at the Nashville Jewish Federation will be hosting a social justice roundtable entitled Integrity for Now. We'll be launching a panel discussion to review the legal challenge to the white supremacy hate groups that spewed hate speech, killed a social justice protester, and attacked in Charlottesville, Virginia. So that's the full paragraph now.
Okay. Any other? Oh, go ahead. Did you?
I believe that was the incorrect version.
Oh, I read it. Please change this paragraph as indicated. And that's the one So if you would be so kind as to read how you actually want it.
Oh my God. Well, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I wanted to clarify that the event takes place on February 11th at 7 p.m. and it's featuring a panel discussion or a presentation by Amy Spitalnik, who is the Executive Director of Integrity for America, being interviewed by John Siegenthaler and addressing white supremacy from Charlottesville to the Capitol.
Great. We will make sure that the minutes appropriately reflect your changes, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to speed up the process, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with the caveat that Commissioner Venick's edits get made.
Okay. We have a motion to accept the minutes as amended. Was there a second to that?
Second.
All right. Any other further changes and further discussion? If not, I guess we need to do the roll call again.
I'll be happy to begin with that, Chair Richmond. Commissioner Tran?
Yay.
Yesbeck?
Yay.
Tucker?
Yay.
Venick?
Aye.
Rodriguez?
Aye.
Davis?
Aye.
Robinson?
Aye.
Richmond?
Aye.
Dash?
Aye.
And I see we've had Commissioner Miller join us. Dontre, he's in the attendee list. This is Commissioner Oscar Miller. He may need to be promoted to presenter.
One second.
Thank you. I'll be very glad when we can all be in the same room together.
I think we feel the same way.
Okay, can you hear us now, Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Yay, glad you're here. And again, Chair Richmond, the motion's passed unanimously.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have the financial update.
And Dontre, if you could pass the the little presenter ball to me for a moment so I can share my screen with the commissioners. This is Mel Fowler Green. Great, thank you. Let's see, where is the thing? If you'll just give me a second, you guys. Okay. This is where we stand in actual spending so far this fiscal year. I'm sorry I didn't get this out to you earlier. There was some questions about what appears to be, if you see the numbers in red, well, they may look like negatives, but in fact they're positives because everything is a debit. So that would actually be a credit. And I was awaiting some guidance from our finance rep on and our budget rep on what that meant. But nonetheless, we are well on target. We have about 58% of budget remaining. However, there's some expenses that haven't cleared yet, particularly two of our big projects. One, the Just Conversations. We had some promotion and production support for that project that will be coming out in the next month or so. And then small stipends for our community facilitators for the Mobile Diversity Seminar. But even with those costs, we are still well within budget. And as soon as I get an answer on what is happening with these apparent inconsistencies and why there are credits rather than debits, I will update this and send this to you by email. And I will also post it on our website along with our other public documents, including the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from anyone about that? Okay, hearing none, I guess we can then move on to our new business. We have some special guests today, presenters from some recommendations related to metro procurement policies from Stand Up Nashville, the Central Labor Council, and the Nashville Building Trades Union. I understand we have Ethan Link, and do you have someone here with you, Ethan? The floor is
yes,
yours.
the much more powerful and
Oh yes, right. Thank you. Well, the floor is all yours, and welcome to both of you. Both of you are old friends, so glad to have you.
thank you very
And
much.
Ethan, before you guys introduce yourselves, Dontre, if you will now give the presenter ball to our guest, Ethan Link, I would appreciate that.
I just saw that come across, so I've got that available. And let me first say, I appreciate everybody so much for having us tonight. And as a member of the Civil Service Commission, I fully understand the difficulties and challenges of trying to operate one of these events virtually, especially with as many folks as y'all have on the board. So hats off to keeping this moving, even in difficult circumstances. So want to introduce myself. I'm Ethan Link. My day job is I'm assistant business manager for the Southeast Laborers District Council. That is a long way of saying LIUNA, which is represents construction workers here in Nashville and across the Southeast, mostly concrete workers, demolition workers, folks that work in power plants. We also represent the service employees at Vanderbilt University. And as I mentioned, I believe we've got Odessa Kelly, our executive director for Stand Up Nashville, is also on the line, who is our leader in a lot of the efforts we're trying to move to have more justice in Metro, not just in procurement, but every part of Metro government. So I don't know if she wants to say hi or not, but she is also on.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ethan, for the very sweet and introduction. I'll pay you later, buddy. I see a lot of familiar faces on here, so hello to those I haven't seen given COVID and a lot that I don't know. I'll go ahead and say this now. Over the next year, let's try to set up one-on-one so I can get to know everyone who's on the commission. As you said, my name is Odessa Kelly. I'm the executive director of Stand Up Nashville. Executive director for Stand Up Nashville since November of 2019. Before, I was a Metro Parks and Recreation employee for 13 and a half years. And how I got into this work is literally, advocating for myself as a city employee and fully understanding, the blight that's happening on working class people in this town. So we have a lot of stuff to go through as far as what we want to present today. So just wanted to say hello and thank you guys for having us on here. Hey, Auntie Linda. So I also want to throw a shout out. I hadn't seen her in a while. So, and excuse me if I look a little weird right now. I just met my brand new nephew and he welcomed me with throw up. So I'm trying to act like I don't spill my neck at the moment. So if you see me looking a little weird, that's because a baby got me. So excuse me while we go through this presentation. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all. And I'm going to share my screen here just a moment and talk to you a little bit about what we've come to speak with you about. Stand Up Nashville and our community partners have been looking at some important issues of equity in Metro Nashville. A lot of y'all remember during the budget conversation, there was a big push around the moral budget, around having the city spends its money on an operating basis towards justice. And that's a really important part of how Metro spends its resources. Obviously, land use and planning practices is another big way that Metro uses its resources. But another way that a lot of people don't think about is how we use our capital spending, our procurement policies. So when we buy things and contract for services, what happens to that money and what is it doing in our name? And so we have put together a little analysis of Metro's procurement policies where there's some shortcomings and gaps, which is common to a lot of different procurement policies around the country, and how we can do better. And so we like to say it's time for us to get it right in Nashville. So right now we usually have a capital spending plan of around $440 million. That's what is authorized annually. Over the last 4-year period, that's around where it averaged. About half of that gets spent at Metro Public Schools. About half of that gets spent by general government. A lot of that is construction. Some of it is buying supplies, information technology, but a lot of it goes into capital construction. But look at also, there are around $3.6 billion in construction permits pulled in Davidson County every year. Now, what's significant about that is that Metro, with this 440, is the single largest buyer of construction services in the Davidson County market. Some years it's the state if they build a really big building, but almost every year, Metro government is the one who drives the entire market. And contractors know that. And so a lot of the practices that they do in that $3.6 billion market, commercial construction market, reflect their desire to also have the contracts for lucrative, consistent work with Metro Nashville. And so this is why that matters to us a lot. In Nashville, between 2017 and 2020, there were 21 deaths in the industry. If you compare that to any of these cities that we often hear Nashville compared to as a peer city, Austin, Atlanta, Charlotte, Denver, anytime the Chamber of Commerce or Nashville's economic development team puts out data, we always compare ourselves to these cities based on how we're doing. But all of those cities have half the number of fatalities in that same period. And all of those cities have larger populations, and all of those cities had higher numbers, a larger value number for construction permits. So there's more people, more construction, and half the number of deaths. And of course, deaths, we know, is just the most extreme measure. That doesn't count all of the injuries, the maimings, the injuries that result in a fatality later. These are on-site fatalities. And so we realize that not a lot has been done since Stand Up Nashville and our partners put together the 2017 Build a Better South report that compared southern cities for what their conditions were like in the construction industry. And these are some of the key findings that we've seen really no movement on since we presented that and have put this to successive metro administrations and metro councils. So we really hope to do something about this soon. And really important pieces about that are that 1 in 5 Nashville workers obtained their job in the construction industry through a temporary staffing agency. And almost a quarter had been placed at a job through a staffing agency in the last 12 months. They didn't have direct employment. Those temporary workers are more than twice likely to get a serious injury than a permanent employee. And it's not hard to imagine why. There's also widespread discrimination that's been seen based on race and sex in the staffing agency industry. And that goes into a lot of other issues that are important to us when we're talking about how our money is spent in our name and what it's doing. Construction accounted for about 8% overall up to 2016, but of all the fatalities in the state. But then after 2016, in those 2 years after that, it was almost 50%. We had a huge increase in the number of fatalities that started happening. And the OSHA injury rate was 4 times higher than the national average for the average construction worker here in Nashville. You're 4 times more likely to be injured on a construction site in Nashville than the national average. And so you can see just some of the details of that. I won't go into too much detail. We will send you a copy of that report. I believe I may have already shared it, but we can send you that report so you can go into the details and see more about it. But it was really important for us to talk about that. Odessa, did you want to add anything about that report and what's happened since?
Yeah, unfortunately, with all the strides that we've made, it's still the same thing happening over and over again. I always put fillers out there through social media, given the time of COVID, to see what I get back. And I believe last week or the week before, I just put out on Facebook, just simply asking people, if any of you have ever worked for temp agencies, please tell me your experiences. And all of you are welcome to go to my Facebook page and just look at all the responses in the comments. These are real life Nashville residents, who are experiencing all these atrocities that Ethan just went through right now in 2021, and I think this is a year where we have to be transformational and mature in what it means to really bring about change for the people that need it. And that is really going deep into some of the policies and examining them, how we can make a difference.
Absolutely. And so just a few examples of some of those consequences. Some of y'all may have read in the last summer about Gustavo Ramirez, a 16-year-old, I have to say boy, a 16-year-old boy who fell 120 feet from a hydraulic scaffold that any job site that had a real OSHA health and safety plan, he would have no right to be on. Minors are not supposed to be involved in roofing activities or be on large. That Gustavo was not alone. There are 16-year-olds out here on construction equipment today. I can promise you. The only reason we know his name is that he died. And right now, the companies that contracted 3 tiers up, he was unfortunately contracted under a 3rd tier sub to make sure that people didn't really know what was happening at that level. The contractors up those tiers could bid on a metro project tomorrow, and the fact that Gustavo died would not count one bit against them for whether or not they would get a metro contract to build. Similarly, Adam Garrett was a 30-year-old man who 2 years ago, unfortunately, I had to monitor the situation where in the John Sevier state building, a public project, he was working for a company called Demo Plus, but he was working as a temp laborer under Trojan labor. And a ceiling fell in and collapsed onto him and crushed him to death. And you can look up the details of this as well. It was a terrible situation and one of several fatalities that have happened under this particular contractor. But of course, none of their direct employees were in the building or injured. It was a temporary worker who was put at risk. And so those are just some of the worst examples. But we also know that there's been an uptick in wage theft, a practice that around the country costs millions, if not $1 billion, I believe, more annually. And a lot of times when we hear about wage theft, we think of people not getting their tips or different scams going on at restaurants, which there is a lot of that. But also it happens a lot in the construction industry, and it happens when there are no clear contracts at the 3rd and 4th tier of subcontracting. Subcontracting at that level used to be something you only saw in housing, residential work. Then it started becoming something more common in the small commercial space. About 10 years ago, it became more popular to see in the larger commercial projects like hotels. And now today, so that's why a couple of years ago, JW Marriott had that you probably read about, more than $2 million in unpaid wages to a group of drywall finishers who eventually organized and got a settlement, not for a windfall of cash, for money they were owed for work they had done. But now that practice has even gotten into public contracts. And so many of you have heard about a situation at McMurray Middle School where a group of concrete workers weren't paid. And so this problem is bad, and it's getting worse, and it's getting more and more in the public sphere. And so if we don't do anything to stop that, if we don't hold accountability to contractors, we'll expect to see more of the same. So what are the problems? Why do we have these problems? Our analysis is that right now there is no community worker voice involved in the process that sets standards for who Metro does contract business with. There's no consequences for these unsafe contractors. There's no accountability for subcontractors or independent contractors. And there's no incentive for the contractors that we are doing business with to invest in safety or training. And so those are broadly the issues that we've seen as a problem. Odessa, do you want to add anything? Just raise your hand if you do.
Keep going. I can add a lot.
Good deal. No doubt.
Ethan,
Yes.
can I ask you a question, please?
Yes, sir.
Is there any data on the ethnicity of these people?
I believe I can access some data about, well, I can, so the Build a Better South report looking back at 2017 does have data about what the, based on its survey, what the ethnicity and gender and other identity breakdowns were. I could probably also find you some national data, but it is, I can say with confidence that people of color are the folks that are most often exploited by temporary agencies, definitely. But I can get you more data to that effect.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Can I add to that as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, another a better metric also, or another good metric to look at too, Mr. Tucker, too, is that I believe, what was the number you said? 3.6 billion? Is that what it was, Ethan?
Right, 3.6 in construction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the money that was made. We should go look also look at the demographics of that and who made that money, because what you don't see is how it was reciprocated into, you know, Black, brown, immigrant, working class, or marginalized communities here in Nashville. And that's probably going to be the better indicator, because there's so many different ways that we can manipulate, you know, when we're looking at the metrics on the way that you said it. So you should look at that as well, but also look at like who is making wealth, and can we really say that we're a diverse and equitable city if only one group of people is making that money?
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so what do we recommend that we do about this problem, which is not only a problem, an urgent problem that's getting worse. It's not just that this has been a lingering issue. Our recommendations is that we could add other voices to the Procurement Standards Board. A board like this, like the board we're talking to right now, represents a lot of Nashville, marginalized people, folks that folks that care about the issues of every Nashvilleian. Procurement Standards Board is fairly small, and we can show you a little bit more about that board and why we think that it should be expanded. We need to stop the worst contractors from getting additional public work. Metro does not have to do business, no matter what anybody says. Another government, for instance, might say. Metro doesn't have to do business with high risk and dangerous contractors. It just chooses not to screen for them. So we need to do something about that. Transparency in subcontracts with clear written contracts for those subs. If money is being spent, public tax money is being spent on construction projects, every worker and every subcontractor should have a contract that tells them what they are owed for that work. That's just a simple thing. And if a contractor cannot assure that, the Metro has no business doing business with them. Incentives for contractors to use safety training and apprenticeship. There are so many contractors that work with, for instance, my union, that participate in a workforce development program that Stand Up is part of, called the MC3. They would love to bid more work in Nashville. They would love to work in Nashville. They exist. They just don't bid on Metro projects because they see who they're competing against, which are folks cutting every corner. And they say, why would I waste my time if the same contractors using the same corner cutting measures are going to win every contract? Why would I even compete? So we're keeping ourselves from even getting the best folks to come in and compete for them.
So this is Erwin Bennick. You use both words. You use the word contractors and subcontractors. In the context of you using those words, is there a distinction that we should be aware of?
Yes, sir. Contract by contractor in this instance, I mean a contractor that is bidding to Metro government and secures a contract with Metro government. By subcontractor, I mean then the businesses that they contract with downstream, so that those subcontractors never have a direct agreement with Metro government. They only have an agreement with the general contractor who was awarded a contract by Metro.
So when I'm looking at number 2 here, when you say stop the worst contractors, are we really talking about subcontractors there or contractors?
Right. That's a great point, and it's a point that a lot of general contractors intentionally subcontract, we would say, to avoid the responsibility for some of those downstream injuries and problems. The fact is that Metro can hold the general contractor responsible for who it chooses to do business with based on their own safety record and their history. I understand that there are some legal constrictions on how far that can go by law, but there certainly are opportunities for Metro to be choosier and make more clear their expectations to those general contractors.
Ethan, let me ask
Yes,
you
sir.
a question.
Yes, sir.
Based on what you just said, so has Metro gone as far as it can legally to pass this responsibility on to the subsequent sub and sub contractors? And if not, would you have any idea of what some of those additional steps are that need to be done?
Mr. Trecker, that's a great question. I would say, of course, they have not. And the first step, the first most important step to take is to make sure that all of those subcontractors have recorded, clear, written contracts, and that those contracts are furnished to Metro government, specifically the Department of Procurement, so that they can be inspected and evaluated if there are problems. And so right now, there are some subcontracts at the third tier that will never show up in a public document. You'd have to know who to call to get to them. And that would be the first most important way, is to make sure that the public has access to what that information is. If we did, we would then know what those risks were, and groups like ours would be able to reach out to their workers and talk to them and see if they had the kind of issues we're worried about. But a lot of times we don't know those issues because they're obscured by not being publicly available. So that'd be the first biggest step. And then finally, just that fifth bucket is setting some basic standards for how people are treated on Metro jobs. We can't have every standard all the way to the level of the Federal Department of Labor, but we can do some basic things that people can rely on. And so just to kind of tick through those in a broad spectrum, here's the Procurement Standards Board. This is how it's composed right now. It involves 3 Metro employees. The Department of Law and the Department of Finance always have a seat, and there's usually a person, there's by law, a department head on that board. And then there are 2 community board seats, just kind of no restriction on who they would be. Our analysis is that those 2 have almost always been occupied by a non-union contractor and generally a employment side lawyer. Not saying anything about who those individuals are, just that's who it's always been. And so you can understand why some of these issues don't really get a lot of get brought up in the room when they're making decisions about how to set our standards. What we would recommend is that we add new voices to that board, specifically a representative of labor, an appointee of the Human Relations Commission. That's why we're here speaking. First, one reason we're speaking with you tonight, a representative of an apprenticeship program, and a Metro Council member or a designee of the Metro Council. And the reason we would like to propose those things is because other boards and commissions have a designee of labor. And this is a specific situation where that perspective would make a huge difference in getting better, well-rounded policy. But also, and I shared this with Director Green, we honestly, when we looked around Metro government and had conversation, we said, who would we trust to represent marginalized people in Nashville on an issue like this? Who has standing to participate in Metro government? It is your commission. People who we know study these issues deeply and think about them deeply, as evidenced by some of the questions you've already asked. And so that's one reason we humbly are here to ask for your support in recommending that y'all have a formal role in being part of that board. And Director Green, I don't know if there was anything specific we needed to speak about on that.
No, I did want to say that I asked our legal representation, Derek, I gave him a heads up that this was coming, and just wanted him to go ahead and look to see if there were any legal barriers to that recommendation. And we don't have an answer yet, but I just want you all to know that that's going to be looked at.
Thank you. And we've
I would also just ask the question that, for me, with a 5-member board and 3 of the 5 board members being Metro employees, is that not conflictual in and of itself, in that those employees more or less they're going to be the representatives of an administration first, rather than that of the Metro government? I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it seems like the outcome is already dictated by the overweight toward Metro employees.
And it certainly had been our experience and what we had observed on other boards and commissions that having a more diversity of voices was leading to better outcomes. And so, of course, like it's how Metro spends its money. Of course, it should have the departments who are engaged in that represented. But we all know that there's a lot of folks and communities out here right now that are, there's lacking for more voice in Metro government, and people are asking for more voice. And so I think it's a good time for us to be considering adding those voices to this board, especially as important and as large a impact as this board has. It is a very small board compared to other Metro boards and commissions.
Also add, Ethan, just first off, thanks so much for sharing this and stuff. I think that there's a lot of times where we have strong impact and we make a lot of recommendations, but there are times where we want to make a difference somewhere and we feel a little handcuffed. And this is an opportunity for us to really break those handcuffs as the Metro Human Relations Commission. I mean, I can think of, if we get a seat at that table, I mean, how, just thinking about the amazing discussions we've had in this commission, how great would it be to have Commissioner Tucker on that board or Commissioner Richmond on that board? I mean, I think that could really, really make an impact, so that there are, again, taking it back to the first slide, less deaths and less injuries in Nashville. And I think that that's something that I really want to see us expand our power and just really have an input when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and things that we hold very valuable that a lot of other boards need to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, and this is only one important feature of our recommendations. Second one is redefining what responsible bidder is. So we have had these ideas vetted by a really impressive lawyer. Some of you guys already know, Carla Campbell, who was at the Brandstetter firm. And the currently state law allows Metro to define who a responsible bidder is, basically who they're willing to accept a bid from, to evaluate. And so we would like to put some barriers up to the worst actors and say there is a standard for how good a contractor has to be to get the privilege to bid on our tax money's work. And so what we're proposing is a barrier to those who have a very serious OSHA violation history, those who violate the provision that subcontractors be given clear written contracts, because we understand the consequences of that. And anybody who has a violation of the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, Family Medical Leave, Americans with Disability, and other federal civil rights protections. We shouldn't be doing business with folks that have a Civil Rights Act violation. Certainly we shouldn't be doing business with them soon after that violation. But today, none of those things disqualify you from doing work with Metro.
Mr. Link, this is Commissioner. So again, going back to my previous question, when you're using the word subcontractor here, are you also going downstream to include any you're using contractor, are you going downstream to include any subcontractors whom that contractor intends to use?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But there is, again, like a limit. When a contractor is bidding for Metro work, a lot of times they will be able to say, honestly, incredibly, we don't know who all of our subcontractors are yet, because we will have to get that evaluated and bid it out. This will help us screen at that first level. And then by having clear written contracts with all subs downstream, it'll give Metro the opportunity to do a better job of evaluating those subs. So it's an incomplete, we won't be able to get everything at the beginning, but over time, we will have a better and better outcome.
Well, let me follow up a little bit.
Yes,
Cannot a bid award be conditioned upon a condition that no subcontractors violate any of these standards?
We believe that it could. We believe that could happen, and it would be up to the procurement. We believe that the Procurement Standards Board would have the power to make that determination itself. But this first level of accountability would get that principle enshrined in Metro law to get it started. So another item that we wanted to put out here was the importance of
I'm sorry, Ethan.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to follow up on the previous question. Could not another bullet be added that if a contractor cannot bid if they've used a subcontractor that violates one of those standards? I think that's what Erwin was, I thought I heard in Erwin's question, but could not another bullet simply be added?
We think that the Procurement Standards Board would have the authority to make that kind of standard. But what we would need them to take, our reading is so far in the law, is they would have to make that, they would have to take that, they'd have to take that step with Metro Council's direction, yes. But the other thing is that it's important about this is that we're talking about contractors that work both in the public and the private commercial world. And so when you're in the private commercial world, they would not be under any real legal requirement to disclose their subcontractors from that private work. And so you're really limited to focusing on who their subs are on the public work. So there's just different limits to what we can do. Yeah.
So Ethan, can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
So I saw the backside of that whole Murray Middle School debacle at the school board meeting, in that the contractor that was involved was hired for another contract with MNPS. So my question is, when they cheat someone out of their money, a subcontractor, I want to use the right terminology. When they cheat a subcontractor out of their money, does that then turn into an OSHA violation?
No, ma'am. Those would be two separate issues. And so with OSHA, it's strictly about your adherence to safety regulations, and you only get an OSHA violation if you are inspected by OSHA. And I should have mentioned, Tennessee has only 34 OSHA inspectors for the entire state. So it's very rare that you'll get a random inspection. Usually you get an inspection when there's an accident on site and fatality requires OSHA to come out. And so very rarely do you have real random inspections of work sites, but it does happen. When When it comes to the issue of that wage theft, in that situation, because there was no written contract, the downstream workers and subcontractors were going to have a very hard time going to your recourse should be to go to a civil court and get a judgment against that contractor for non-payment. Your other options, as the case of the JW Marriott, is that you can get a lien against a tax lien against the hotel, for instance, or a lien against the hotel, and then they will have to settle that. And you know, you get a lot of other actors involved at that point. And so that is managed through the civil courts. In the case of a public building, though, you're put in a very awkward position. If you're not paid, you're then put in a position to try to file a lien against a school. It becomes very problematic. And so, you know, having clear contracts is the best way to make sure that the most likely to be exploited workers have a easy way, a clear way to seek recourse in court, rather than put Metro and Metro Public Schools in a situation where they're having the kind of conflict we saw at the school board. So your question's well asked. Thank you.
A question.
Ethan, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt a commissioner. Who's speaking?
This is Janice Rodriguez.
Okay, go ahead, Janice.
Just quickly, what's been the resistance to these additional layers of transparency and accountability? I mean, obviously this is not news to the board, in procurement. So what kind of resistance have you gotten?
The most pushback we get is from contractors who claim that somehow having safe work sites and paying and having clear contracts is going to be burdensome and costly for them, and that they would in some way have to pass that cost on to Metro. I believe that is inaccurate because there are other cities that have high standards, and the cost you can take as a good example, the cost of what the projected cost of the soccer stadium coming up is not that different than the cost of the Minnesota Vikings stadium in Minnesota or Minneapolis, where they have very high standards. Yet, in one case, it's the same contractor, two different places, the same cost, and one place just has lower standards. And so we don't see that cost increase. We just see more certainty for Metro. So that's the biggest complaint people have. Yes,
Sounds like the tail is wagging the dog there.
yes, ma'am. I agree.
Ethan, I have another question too, quickly, and I'm not necessarily sure if you and Vanessa can answer this, but I'm interested if Carla had recommendations, but having been a lawyer for workers who experienced wage theft, I know that most, if not nearly all of those kinds of cases end up getting settled. Right? So you could discover that civil rights violations or FLSA violations have been alleged, but given that there is no court finding or even, a DOL, very, very rarely, what do we do with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why, and so that's a very good question, and that's why there's two reasons. One reason that we had the specific piece of responsible contractor definition be that you had to have clear written contracts with all your subs, because we know that, like you're saying, a lot of those complaints get settled, but if you don't provide clear written contracts, this recommendation anticipates that the reason you were trying to not have clear written contracts was that you planned in some form or fashion to give yourself the flexibility that those violations might have happened. So it's a way to kind of treat that problem at its stem rather than wait for the violation and then have to try to figure out how to handle it now. And so that's one way we approached it. But the other way that we approach it, and that is significant, is that instead of just trying to get rid of bad contractors, we need to promote good contractors and give them a reason to do better by us and our community. And so this Procurement Standards Board has the power to add to its contract evaluation criteria positive items, very similar to what folks have heard about minority business participation. If you have more minority business participation, you are going to get extra credit in the evaluation of your bid. We would recommend that Procurement Standards Board, with these important new voices added to it, give extra credit to contractors who promise and in their bid to have OSHA training, high-level OSHA training for their workers, to have health care and workers' comp coverage for all their workers, to use a federally registered apprenticeship program, which is a very a formal Department of Labor certification, basically like an accredited apprenticeship, not just a training program you can call an apprenticeship, but one that the Department of Labor said this is an apprenticeship that leads to a career. An apprenticeship readiness program like the MC3, which is a program that takes folks with no construction background and gets them the tools they need to start a construction career, as opposed to going through a temp agency. And independent wage monitoring, so that if you're a contractor and you say, look, I'm going to contract out with a company to make sure that my workers get paid on time, no matter who the subcontractor is, I'm going to pay somebody to keep an eye on that for me and make sure everyone is treated fairly. And so if you do any of those things, we would say that the Procurement Standards Board should offer extra credit that would also offset any costs that are incurred by a contractor who's trying to do the right thing by training.
Okay. We're running short of time. We got 5 more minutes total. So if you have any final points you want to make, because we still have a full agenda, we still have some items. So I hate to cut you off. This is important, but we've only got 5 more minutes. So whatever you want to say to conclude.
Perfectly timed, because this is my last slide. And before I get the hook, the bare minimum, we want there to be some bare minimum standards that will help people. And that means OSHA 10 training for all workers. OSHA 10 means 10 hours of OSHA training over 2 days. That, in our opinion, is a minimum. Federal projects right now require this, a minimum amount of training to make sure you don't get killed. Hand washing stations on all floors of a project when there is a pandemic, as we've just noticed. The health department has instituted this rule currently during this pandemic. We think that should be a regular practice. And so hand washing stations are important. Something that's not on here we would like to add is we have a lot more women in the construction industry than we used to. And we would like to make a recommendation that on public projects, there be at least 2 bathrooms, 2 porta potties at least, that will service more than just one gender, because we are finding that a lot of those bathrooms, frankly, are really unsanitary and overused, and some women on these job sites are feeling unsafe and uncared for by that situation. And finally, and this is an important one, is that temporary workers on Metro projects should be offered direct employment after 30 days of working. That means you can't just keep somebody as a temp worker for months and months and months, because the whole purpose is to get you to a job. And so direct employment comes with more rights. It comes with more accountability. And we just don't think contractors should be able to string folks along, especially when those are the folks, communities of color, marginalized people who are frequently being told they have to go through these temp agencies. So that's my presentation. That's what our recommendation. We would love the support of any of the individual members or collectively the Human Relations Commission to support an effort to make these changes at Metro.
All right, that was wonderful. Thank you, Odessa and Ethan. I know you did ask for a specific recommendation from us, but as Mel noted, we're checking with the legal department to make sure we can do that. So, yeah, follow up with you depending on what they tell us. Mel, did you want something?
I just want to ask a question. What's the timeline for proposed legislation on this? So this commission can make a formal recommendation of support if that's what they want to do.
Yep. Some legal details we're working out to make sure that we're getting something that is enforceable and in quality. We believe we'll have something that can be introduced by March the 2nd. That council meeting as a first reading. So at that point, there will obviously be a long legislative process ahead at that point, but we anticipate. But that's when we are looking at.
Mel, can I ask something about the timeline real quick? Is just if March the 2nd is when legislation's coming out, if we want to formally support the bill, do we as a commission probably need to make that decision today, or does that sound right? Or is our next meeting, I don't think we'll, or is it okay if we do that after the first reading? We can do it for the 2nd. Does that feel right?
Yes, our next meeting is March 1st.
Well, there you go.
All right. That's very helpful.
Yeah, so if there is the possibility, Ethan and Odessa, to have a solid, like, this is what's being filed, and you're okay with us all talking about it in a public meeting on March 1st, then we could put that on the agenda for a formal vote. And then that will also mean that, we can advocate. We could either me or the commissioner can speak with council about that, and I think that would be the best way forward.
Excellent. Well, then I will make sure to have that to you before it's filed.
Okay.
This is Yesback. Sorry. One thing that I think would be helpful to add to whatever you're proposing, I don't know if you're getting into specifics there or not, but having the general contractor or the direct contractor be responsible for the payment of wages of all subcontractors would be a helpful thing to try and enforce the rights of the drywall workers of the world who get screwed.
Absolutely. We'll look into how far we can do that. Did you have anything? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say, if we could just take a step back outside of this. I mean, overall, looking at this, the reason why we're doing this is because this is an opportunity for us to help on all those other things that we talk about. We have a housing issue that's going on in Nashville. Those things that Ethan just proposed would help that, right? Because we're now creating a workforce that can have sustainable housing, or the means to attain sustainable housing, right? We have a large number of people who are pretty much trapped into poverty. Reason being is because we don't give them the opportunities to make a fair wage, because we just look at the process of what is the cheapest way to do things. So that's the biggest reason why we want to change this. Us changing procurement is not just looking at the process of purchasing power. It is literally looking at how we can intentionally create a sustainable community that everyone can live in. And all those things that everyone has just touched on are the reasons that we're truly doing this. Like, it is the responsibility of all the boards and commissions to really look at how do we mitigate a lot of the problems that we have. And economic sustainability is part of it, and procurement plays a large role in that.
Thank you.
If I could just make a couple comments, I appreciate this presentation, and I've been well aware of the work that Odessa and crew have been doing. To me, the issues of equity come into play here very, very heavy. Also, this should be, in my estimation, this should be easy for Metro to do, in that we all should desire moral and ethical governance. And when you have to settle on wages, that means that you're not going to get the many times less than living wage that you worked for that you didn't get. So that's still not a win, so that they are perpetual victims in this system. Plus, I think if Metro did do this, this is just good politics that the general public would have no problem with. But to me, the obstacle here is the political reality of the money and influence that comes from the people that benefit at the top. So as the Human Relations Commission, and I would hope that we could, through whether lobbying or whatever, try to help people understand that the cost benefit here is really worth it. Because I see how people can say that this is really not worth us taking this up. We got to go through all of this. And that's because we've already devalued the affected class. And so we're okay with that. And that's the problem here, is that they're often people of color. Many times they are immigrants, and that value on them is not there. But it does not, just because it's legal, it doesn't make it right.
I second Commissioner Tucker. I think I'm just going to say, if there's any pushback from other commissioners, feel free to voice it. But I would really recommend, as a board, that Mel, if you can continue interacting with Ethan and Odessa and just keeping us in the loop, that would be great. And I also think, you know I've also been aware of this for a bit, so just to be transparent, but I would really recommend for us to really formally support that bill when it comes in March. I think that could really benefit our city, and would love to see one of you all on that board and really adding diversity and equity and inclusion in a space that has been closed off from that, to be frank. So.
One last little bit. Is there any way, Mel? I know that I hadn't looked on the list, but normally we have Ms. Falls from the mayor's office here. Is there any way that you could try to get some feeling from the mayor's office on where they stand at on this, that would possibly, well, I know it would be informative as to how easy this would be or how hard this would be. And if that's something that they would be interested in, as far as just leading this piece of trying to fix this part of the system.
So we do have Mary on the in our meeting today, and during the presentation, she emailed me and asked for a copy of the PowerPoint. So I've already sent that to her, and I'm happy to follow up. And actually, Mary has her hand up, so I'm gonna let her speak for herself. Mary.
Thank you. I thought this was really superb, and thank you to Odessa and Ethan for the presentation and for the commission for asking for the presentation. I think there's a lot of room for, clearly there's a lot of room for improvement, and I think Mel made the right first step, just going through legal to make sure, kind of to know where the guardrails are. And then, so I think we can really move on a lot of that, but you all taking a role is important as well. And then one question I had was, did you invite Michelle Lane from procurement to come today as well?
I did not invite her today, but I believe, and I don't want to speak for Odessa and Ethan, but my suspicion is that they've had opportunity to talk to her about this bill, and If not, I'm happy to help facilitate that. But I was under the impression that they'd already been in some conversation with her. Is that right, Ethan?
Yes, ma'am, it is. We've actually furnished a draft. We did furnish a draft of the of legislation, if not final, because we do have some details to work out. And when I said we had details to work out, those were the details I was referring to. So we have furnished a draft to Metro Legal and to Michelle Lane, but we also, we wanted community partners to also have input and it not just be that cut and dry. So yes, we have done that, and we'll continue to get the best feedback we can.
That'd be great. I do think it would be good. It'd be fair for her to have a chance to respond, because these are really important items that are being discussed, and very, very, very grateful. Very grateful.
Could I also ask that the PowerPoint be distributed to commission members?
Yes, I will send both the PowerPoint and a link to 2017 report. The what was that called, you guys? Build a Better South? Yeah, the
Yes.
Build a Better South report. I'll send that. And for constituents, we will post of that PowerPoint and a link to that report on our website as well.
If I can too, yeah, we're putting it out as well. You can go to the Stand Up Nashville page and see it, and feel free to reach out to us. You, Mary Falls, any question that you have. We appreciate you being on the call as well.
One thing, I know we're short of time, so I don't want to take too long, but I've represented a lot of construction workers in different cases against commercial contractors and residential contractors, but not employees who were working on, metro contracts. So I don't know if the same thing applies, but what I see is the reason there's 3 levels of subcontractors is because the lowest level down the totem pole hires the undocumented workers who don't really speak English. Then you have some fly-by-night guy who is usually some Hispanic person who speaks English. And then you get to the real layers of subcontractors there after that. So if you're talking about framers, okay, I got a framing sub who's a legitimate business, but they get all their laborers from Jose, who isn't really a legitimate business, and he's basically working along with his guys, but he knows how to speak English. And so at the bottom of the barrel on all this are usually undocumented, usually Hispanic workers. And the problem that I see with this scenario is, are you, in trying to fix a problem, I love the idea of having written contracts and written standards and making sure that the people at the bottom of the barrel get paid, but are you unintendedly going to squeeze out all these laborers who are undocumented to not being able to get on a contract? Because now Jose, the Framing Contractors Limited Inc., who's a big real company, isn't going to be able to hire the undocumented workers because they won't have Jose to filter it through anymore.
Yeah, well, just 2 things I would point out about that. One is we have brought these ideas and legislation to, and I don't want to speak for them, but we have brought these ideas to the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, and so we are taking their guidance on making sure that there's safeguards to make sure that it's not unduly impacting the exact scenario you're speaking about. The other thing I would point out is that undocumented workers, a lot of people don't know this, they are covered by all these federal labor laws. Just because you're undocumented doesn't mean you don't have those rights. And I've seen situations where their rights have been petitioned for in federal court. So
absolutely, and I represent them often, and I get them their money, usually paid in full, double. Commissioner Truckee,
yes,
so they don't have to set when they hire yes back. But what they can't do is get hired if there's not a guy like Jose who will sign on the form that he has verified their eligibility status. That's my concern. It's not that they're not entitled to be paid. Of course, they're entitled to be paid for the work that they've done. But my concern is if you tighten it so much, they may never get hired.
I would push back against that respectfully. Only reason I push back against that is because I don't see that happening in other places. We have to stop using the excuse that a person is undocumented as a reason of why they live in poverty. I mean, they live in poverty because someone at the top is just being greedy, and we have a lack of public policy that protects them. You know, I understand what you're saying, Commissioner, but I just want us to we have the ability to be brave and be bolder than that. You know, we should be able to acknowledge we do have a bunch of people who are undocumented, and also acknowledge that they are giving a great service to making Nashville the it city, and we owe them, you know, due pay for the good work that they do. So
I totally agree with that sentiment, to the extent that anyone thinks that I'm suggesting that we should not be appreciative or pay them their full worth, or pay them just like you pay anybody else. I want to say that's not what I was suggesting. I'm just worried about some unintended consequences where you may cut people out of the labor market because you put in requirements that will not give the sort of plausible deniability that I have 100 workers and 98 of them are undocumented immigrants.
Right, you're exactly right. I think we're exploring to make sure that happens. We're just asking that we have the commission support in supporting whatever pieces, ideas, leverages that we come up with to make sure that that doesn't happen. But also, too, I want to make the point that returning citizens, people with felonies, are also exploited in the exact same market as well. A lot of these companies prey on them and don't ever give them a chance to really acclimate back into society and produce. So that is also another demographic of people who are severely exploited by the way this is set up.
Okay, but we're seriously running short on time. So I'd like to thank Ethan and Odessa for being here. Appreciate your wonderful presentation. We have said we will follow up. We'll get, if you can get that text of your bill to us prior to the March 1st meeting, so we can look at it, and we'll probably again vote on the proposal that you've asked us to vote on. And I certainly look forward to doing whatever we can to support your efforts. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for all the hard work you're doing on this issue.
Thank you.
Moving on in the agenda, with the little time we have left, we still have the lessons from the fines and fees report by the Center for Justice and Safety Finances. Is that Mel? Is that you?
No, not necessarily. I know that I shared that report with you all a couple times. And I've had some calls from community members and some partners that we've worked with on other things. Just saying, hey, look, you know, this report provides opportunity for advocacy, for some change. And so I need you all to read the recommendations of that report, to reduce the reliance on fines and fees, and have a conversation about it. I'm interested in Commissioner Tucker, if you have done some work on specific recommendations, or if you have some recommendations that come from that report that you would encourage the commission look at in a sort of more robust way.
Yes, I do. And I was hopeful that most of us would read through it, and it's actually, it kind of glosses over the depth that goes into each of the particular areas, like the bail reform, and how the practice was to take fines and fees out of bails before they were returned to the person. Well, the bail fund sued the city, and we prevailed in that not too long ago. But the issue around just the setting of the fee there's no matrix in doing it. There is a commissioner, which is just an attorney who is appointed by the General Sessions Court to set bails. They have no training in this, and they tend to set bails based upon, I would say, the social cachet of the potential crime. If you recall, when the district attorney's office went to get a warrant for Andrew Delkey, the commissioner refused to sign the warrant because of the social climate and the often unfair relationship that the police department has with night commissioners. So that it actually had to go to, I believe it was Judge Mondelli who actually signed it. And so the General Sessions courts could do a great job of setting out some strict guidelines, a matrix around setting of bails, which if they just follow what the Constitution would require, one is the ability of the person to pay it. But so often bail is used to keep people incarcerated also. We saw that during the protest that went on here in the city, that to set a $75,000 bond for an individual who was charged with various crimes during that protest. But that's just one area. Inside of the probation end, there's all these practices that the report doesn't really capture. You take an individual that gets put on probation for burglary. They have no history of drug abuse anywhere, but they are often forced to pay for a weekly urinalysis test, but they have no history of that. Or because they were defined in court or whatever, they could also be told that they have to go to anger management class and have to pay that. So inside of those areas, there's a whole lot of work. I mean, yes, I'm glad that we finally got the report out, but it's almost like there has to be this drill down for people who are not aware of the depth that fines and fees are a deciding factor in our criminal justice system. You have so many people that if we just took the numbers, and I'm curious now, and I made a note to try to find out for myself, of the probation violations that result in reincarceration, I'm curious to know how many are technical violations, which mean they did not meet some requirement of the probation, which one of the requirements is paying your fees on time. You know, when many of the probation violations that result in reincarceration don't come from them committing another crime. So sometimes probation becomes this cycle that folks can't get up out of. So I just say that generally, but I'm glad that we finally got the report. I have reached out and had a couple of conversations, and I will do that again. Just in casual conversation, I've spoken with John Button about this report, and hopefully at some time in the future that we'd be able to get together and talk about it a little bit more in depth. But his schedule the last couple of months has not been able to allow for that. But I think the initial findings are good enough for us to talk about, but the specificity is really what has to be brought to bear to truly to understand that not only is it outdated, but when you go into a system already not having enough resources, this only adds to it. You know, if you come up and you can't afford your lawyer, and then you have to get appointed one, you already cross that 50% line in my estimation. So that's just some casual comments, Mel.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Tucker, I can think of some folks, but I would be interested in following up with you on who has some expertise on some of these issues that you're talking about that are outside of that report itself. And then for perhaps you and I to have a conversation about what specific recommendations we can support and really start working on.
I would definitely love to. I know that Don Diener immediately comes to mind. She helped spearhead doing away with the jail fee, the renegotiation of the telephone rates at the jail. I mean, so she's someone who has been working on this even when she was in the PD's office of trying to mitigate some of the effects of these myriad of fines.
Okay, and in fact, I got a request from Dawn, for her and I to have more conversation about the fines and fees report and some other advocacy. So what I can commit to for you all is for me to follow up with Dawn and have a meeting and talk about, what's realistic, what based on her expertise in this report, what's realistic for possible changes.
This is Erwin Benick, and I would encourage us to sort of look at that. And there's a philosophical issue to be addressed here, which is how much do we want our city to be to premise some of its revenue generation on people being in jail. I think that is as much of a philosophical issue and a human rights issue as a budgetary issue. And we should be prepared to perhaps make a recommendation to both the mayor's office and the council on that after we've had a chance to digest this report and get some further feedback.
I'm curious, I don't know, you forget the name of the official, is it the Criminal Justice Task Force? It's the police, the sheriff, the DA, the PD. I forget the name of that group. And they used to meet every month or whatever to go over, particularly when the jail population was high. Would this be something that needs to be officially brought to their attention also, in that most of these fines, I would say 95% of all these fines are attached to their various areas of responsibility?
And I don't know the answer to that, but I am happy to work on that and figure out, right, what are the lines of authority here? So in directing advocacy or recommendations, like who are you all doing that to? So I'll be happy to do some of that work. And I do, Chair Richmond, I know it's 5:32, and if you all will indulge just a couple of minutes, I have some updates from the office that I would like to share. Great, thank you so much. So the Just Conversations project is really exciting. We've gotten so much great feedback about that project. I'm hoping to have some metrics to share with you all on, how many people are watching the videos. And we're talking about doing a brief survey for the community to find out how many are participating, right? Like I've heard from the Oasis Center and their whole staff is doing it together, right? So it shows up as one video review, but it's their whole staff who are doing it together. So that's pretty exciting. And of course, as I emailed you all, Dr. Kendi retweeted our project, which for us in the office, I can't even tell you. Yeah, we were just so excited. And I also presented the community project by invitation on Sharon Kay's show, the 411, last Wednesday. And she wanted me to pass along to you all some laudatory words. She said she was really impressed that given COVID and the complications that has prevented us to get our work done, she's really impressed with the work that this commission in your office is doing in the face of that. So good on you, good on us.
Mel, I just wanted to add, just so you can add the numbers correctly, but I think also there's API Middle Tennessee, which is for Asian and Pacific Islanders. It's a Middle Tennessee group, but they're actually hosting a Just Conversations party that we invited to. There's a Facebook event and stuff, so I'll send that your way as well.
Okay.
They're having a whole panel discussion and everything about it, so just another testament to how great that project is. And if anyone else wants to know about that, just get my email from Mel, and I'm happy to send it over to everyone.
Good, thank you so much. Is there any other comments about just conversations?
Well, this is not a comment about the Just Conversation. I didn't want to miss this. This is one last comment on the fines and fees. That I do appreciate Mayor Cooper, who agreed early on to continue this work and that he was interested in it. And I needed to make sure that I wanted to say that I do appreciate his office pushing this on to fruition.
Thank you. Another update. So very sadly, Sarah has gone to greener pastures over there in Cincinnati. And so we are short a staff member. I've requested, as I've talked about in previous meetings, I did make the request for an exemption to the hiring freeze. I haven't yet got an answer, yes or no. So I've been in some conversation. I've also brought Chair Richmond into the conversation. But as of right now, I don't have approval to hire a new policy research director or specialist. So what that means for you all is I'm down a quarter of our staff, and that staff position has some expertise that I do not have. And so I'm going to do my best to partner with community partners, and potentially I could also contract with somebody to do some discrete policy or research work to get us through. But that's where we're at.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions?
Mel, are we looking to hire a replacement in the future, or what's kind of maybe I missed that and it may have been said.
Oh, yeah, I would like to hire that replacement, but there's a hiring freeze across Metro departments. So I requested an exemption.
Sorry, yeah, now it's all, it froze right at the wrong part, and now it's all making sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. If anyone has anything else, well, thank you, Mel. Any final announcement from anybody before we adjourn? Do you have wanted to say, Mel?
I did just want to say that the program that Commissioner Venick had announced last time that then became a topic of conversation in our minutes. We've co-sponsored that event. And so along with a bunch of other community partners, and we just sent an announcement through Emma promoting that event. And then finally, we did have our quote unquote mobile diversity seminar for the police academy last week. And it was not mobile, but nor was it completely virtual. And we had offered that to our community partners to have that event be all virtual, but to their credit, they wanted to do it in person with, precautions, COVID precautions. So that's what happened. We really thought that was a testament to the commitment that our community partners and our community engagement director, Barbara, really show to that project.
And in fact, this is Barbara. I wish I could see you, but I'm taking minutes. If I could just quickly add that given the I wouldn't say current social justice climate, I would say exposed social justice climate, because these issues have always been here. This mobile diversity seminar, we pushed the envelope, and the training academy was here for it. They were very, very receptive. There was no holding back from the trainees or the community members. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Emmett Till, everything was in the room. And it was a very vibrant and I would say transformational experience. So I just wanted to kind of add that to Mel's comments.
Thank you, Barbara.
Any final announcements before we?
Erin, I just wanted to say I'm sorry that I was late for the meeting. I've been here and been listening, and it was fantastic. And just wanted to let you all know that I did chime in a little late, but I've been here. It's about, I don't know, 4:20 or 4:30. Thanks.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Well, if there are no further announcements, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Dash, I'll make the motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Don't say anything. Have a good night, and we'll see you all next month.
See you all.
Very good.
Every